We act like other countries are repressive, other countries are authoritarian, other countries hold their citizens down. We're the free country, right? This is the largest settlement. This is the largest amount of money a police department has ever had to pay for harm they've done to citizens, to civilians. And that's a big deal, but perhaps bigger than just that story is the goal, the long-term goal of this. So this is from USA Today. Largest settlement in U.S. history over police misconduct reached $45 million in the Randy Cox case. A $45 million settlement has been reached in the civil police brutality case against Randy Cox. Wait, sorry, not against. Police brutality case involving Randy Cox, a black man now paralyzed from the chest down following an arrest by police officers in New Haven, Connecticut, nearly a year ago. The case represents the largest settlement involving police misconduct in U.S. history and comes 2 years after the $27 million settlement involving the murder of George Floyd. And it sounds like what happened to this man, Randy Cox, is similar to what happened to Freddie Gray in Baltimore, where I now am. But with Freddie Gray, he died. But it's, it's what the police in their euphemistic way call a rough ride. Basically, they handcuff the guy, they throw him in the back of a metal van, and then they slam on the brakes everywhere they're going so that this person is flying into the sides and the back and the front of this van, and sometimes ends up paralyzed, sometimes dead. In the case of Freddie Gray, it was dead. In the case of Randy Cox, it is paralyzed from the waist down. This case was won by civil rights attorney Ben Crump, who said, and this is what I think is part of the key, is in this woefully corrupt, disgusting police brutality system we have here. He says, my endeavor has been very consistent. When we set the record with George Floyd with 27 million, I was very clear that what we're trying to do is make it financially unsustainable for the police to continue to violate our constitutional rights and brutalize us unnecessarily and unjustifiably. Basically, they're using lawfare, which is usually the tactic of the rich. They're using lawfare against police departments in the U.S. The term lawfare comes from warfare, but without firing guns, you're firing legal briefs. And it is usually used by the disgusting tops of our systems. The CEOs and the corporations use it to try and crush much smaller people who can't afford to fight that kind of lawfare battle. But in this case, you have attorneys and citizens using lawfare, using the courts to go after our police systems, which are some of the worst in the fucking world. I mean, these are the most brutal policing systems. We have the largest prison state in the world, and we do not have the largest population in the world. We are 4 to 5%, I think 4% of the world's population, and we have 25% or more of the world's prisoners. We are a disgusting police state. We are a police state, and yet we call ourselves the land of the free? The land of the what? How can you have the most prisoners in the world and be the land of the free? It is so ironic. It is so dystopian. And this is one of the rare moments of citizens fighting back and winning against this police system. And in case I need to remind everyone, Joe Biden is one of the worst perpetrators in terms of building up this prison state, building up this brutal policing system that originated from slave patrols. In case you wanted to know, the history of U.S. policing started with slave patrols and slowly grew into this system we have now of heavily armed men and women, mainly men, standing on each corner, ready to harass anyone who doesn't fit into the status quo, who doesn't fit into the way the ruling elite want things to work. And to give you one example of how Biden, now he's been doing it his whole career, so this is a more recent example, but his whole career, he's been putting forward, sometimes crafting, supporting, pushing bills to make police stronger, bigger, better funded, and succeeding most of the time. He also proudly said that he essentially wrote the Patriot Act. But this is a more recent example. President Biden's signature. So this is while he's president. This is, most of the stuff you can point to, the crime bill and everything that Joe Biden wrote, the Clinton crime bill that was a big Joe Biden thing that doubled our prison population, mainly black and brown communities, but anybody who isn't in that top 5% echelon. But this is done. This next part was done while he was president. President Biden's signature American Rescue Plan Act, which gave local governments $350 billion to recover from COVID-19. But as this study shows from the Marshall Project, they spent most of it on police and courts and prisons. And Joe Biden supported that usage of the money. He told them, well, you can get that money for more police funding from the COVID funds. After signing the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan Act last spring, President Joe Biden touted what the economic stimulus bill would deliver: food assistance to millions of those in need, who wouldn't be in need if we weren't in capitalism; lower healthcare premiums for millions of Americans who wouldn't be struggling if we didn't have capitalism, or even if we just had healthcare, even if we just had a slightly more sane, slightly more caring version of this parasitic, vampiric economic system, those people would not be struggling for healthcare. And it would include $350 billion for state and local governments to spend on COVID-19 recovery. Economists say it was the largest infusion of federal funding in local governments in 40 years. Okay, so when you send that much money to local governments, what do they end up using it for? Who's this quote from? This is okay. So this quote is from Joe Biden. He said during his State of the Union, the American Rescue Plan provided $350 billion cities, states, counties that can use to hire more police, invest in more proven strategies like community violence interruption. Yeah, that means police. Trusted messengers. He said, we should all agree the answer is not to defund the police. No, we only have the largest, most brutal policing system, killing more people than anywhere in the world. But yeah, they need more money. They just can't hang on to money. If you could just really, because that, I've often said, when someone's killing too many people, try giving them a few bucks. Just give them some money. If one of these mass shooters had just had a few more dollars, then they wouldn't be brutal at all. He said, we should all agree the answer is to not defund the police. It's to fund the police. Fund them. Fund them. Fund them. It's tough to say whether he was doing that because his brain was skipping like a record. It's to fund them. Fund them. Fund them. Fund them. And then someone behind him, an aide or something, smacks him on the back. Fund them. Fund them. To the tune of billions of dollars, because when you're that senile, sometimes things just start skipping around. You gotta skip the needle. You gotta jump the needle, so you slam him on the back. Try it with Grandpa next time you get a chance. Anyway, it's tough to know whether he was doing it because of that or because he wanted to reiterate that we should fund the police more. He said, fund them with the resources and training. I do think it's probably the needle skipping, because he then repeats the next part as well. It's not to defund the police. It's to fund the police. Fund them with resources and training. They need to protect our communities. I think, in all honesty, I'm not even kidding here. What it is Joe Biden is losing his memory. He's going senile. He's becoming demented, and the past tense of dementia. He's becoming demented, and so what he does to kill time, to give him a moment to try and figure out where the fuck in the sentence he is, and I have my ways as well, such as going but that's a little bit different than a guy who keeps repeating the same words over and over and over again so that he can have time to figure out whether a verb comes next or a noun. That's what he's doing. Anyway, in case you didn't get it from his quote, he wants to fund the police. So then the article continues. That's the idea. Sorry, that's indeed what thousands of state and local governments did with the federal COVID-19 relief funds they received. While the Treasury Department's lax reporting requirements, well, I'll get to that part in a second. But so these states and municipalities and cities, they took this trillions of dollars, hundreds of billions at least, and they used the majority of it to just pay the guys with guns, hire more guys with guns, more steroidal freaks with guns to go out into the cities and make sure no one's getting uppity. Make sure there is no risk to the ruling power structure. And so that's really where a lot of the money went. But so it then says that it's tough to actually figure out the exact number, the exact amount that has gone to police because a lot of the reporting is kind of vague. They did a review of the latest data, shows that billions of dollars flowed into the criminal justice system by the first quarter of 2022, from covering payroll to purchasing new equipment. So far, governments have allocated $100 billion of the $350 billion. In many cases, the money flows to programs and institutions not with the greatest need during a public health crisis and economic upheaval, but those with the most existing political and budgetary power: police, corrections, and courts. And then it shows some of the numbers. But they talk about how challenging it is to even figure out that all this money is going to police and prisons because some of it is so vague. They say it could say that the expenditures are for government services expenses, as in Laredo, Texas, where they sent $22 million to government service expenses. Well, what did that actually mean? It means courts, prisons, and police. Or they can be as broad as salaries and burden for the provision of core government services, which includes personnel costs for all departments. So they just flood the police with money to continue this totalitarian system we have, inverted totalitarianism, to continue a system where people cannot fight back, where they cannot demand more, where those who are struggling are stuck in that situation and often end up resorting to bad choices because of the situation they're stuck in. Well, the way to make sure that the richest of the rich can maintain their lifestyle and not fear that the people might stand up, might get angry enough to fight back, is to have just as many people with guns as possible. I mean, the U.S. police system is one of the largest armies in the world. And yet we get to act like it's not, right? We act like other countries are repressive. Other countries are authoritarian. Other countries hold their citizens down. We're the free country, right? So, yes. Anyway, all of that is to say this stuff is way too funded, way too heavily armed. The number of police killings, the number one in the world for police killings. And as I've mentioned before, although it is like 1,200 a year, people in America killed by police, that's the official number. The Lancet Medical Journal did a more in-depth research of American policing and found that it's really double that, because half of all killings by police are not written down as killings by police. They're written down as cardiac arrest, excessive electricity to the forehead that might have come from a police taser. But, they lacked oxygen, and it doesn't mention that there was a steroidal police barbarian wrapped around their neck. They couldn't find enough oxygen in the surrounding area. So it's 1,200 is roughly the number per year. It's actually more like 2,400 people killed by police every year. So there you go. At least citizens are fighting back in the form of lawfare, in the form of using law to try and hold this system accountable.